Alright, what's going on, guys? Elden Ring DLC is a lot deeper than we initially imagined. Much like things were with the base game, it still feels like every single day we're finding something entirely new, and today I'm going to show you several. So you know how these videos work. If I show you something today that you didn't already know, then be sure to leave a like on the video and subscribe if you're new around here. We cover all things Elden Ring and FromSoftware, but with all that, let's go ahead and get straight into the first one. With the release of the DLC, we were introduced to 3 new character forms, those being the Lamenter form, the Dragon form, and the Dragon Priestess form. Now these are forms that your character can take when you have no armor equipped. Now despite that, these forms give you a pretty decent damage negation, as well as raise your resistances a lot, so they provide a pretty good alternative to wearing light armor, depending on what your build is. But the only way to actually lose these forms is by dying, so that means something pretty interesting can happen. Did you know that since these forms count as wearing no armor, you can trigger the Frenzied Flame cutscene while in this form, and it works for all 3 forms, giving you a really cool alternative to just being naked in this scene. Now one thing you'll notice is that this room is actually a safe zone, so you can't use the items in here, but since the only way to lose the form is through death, then you can just go activate it somewhere else and come back. Now even though this doesn't do anything gameplay wise, I think it's a really cool trick, and in my opinion makes this cutscene a lot better. But the only sad thing about it is that even though you accept the Frenzied Flame in this form, you don't actually get the marks or the glowing eyes until you turn back into a human. But aside from that, I think it's still pretty cool. Another thing that Elden Ring DLC innovated on quite a bit are the catacombs, making them much more large and intricate as opposed to the ones in the base game. And one of the tactics they used to do that was introducing new enemy types, with new variations of the imps, as well as a new enemy type entirely called the Putrescent Sorcerer. These malevolent mages wield Ghost Flame with a spell type entirely unique to them that the player unfortunately can't get. Their spells have the unique ability to ricochet off walls and bounce off surfaces. Despite that though, they're actually pretty weak, likely to go down in 1 or 2 hits depending on what build you're using, and if you fight them at close range, they're pretty useless, which means there's a high chance you never got a good look at these guys. So you probably didn't know that these undead sorcerers are carrying babies on their chest. In typical FromSoftware creepiness, you can see the little babies in their swaddles wrapped around the chest, but sadly rotting away and covered in spider webs, much like the actual sorcerer they're wrapped to. Now unfortunately, these guys don't actually drop anything besides Ghost Glowvort, so we don't have much of any lore on them. All we know is that they're Ghost Flame sorcerers that patrol the catacombs and are rotting away, evidenced by the little mushrooms growing out of their shoulders, which gives me a great opportunity to plug my last video talking about how Elden Ring is about mushrooms. Check that one out if you haven't already. But now that you know about this little design detail that's very interesting, why do you think they chose this? Just to add that extra little bit of weirdness to the design, or is there more to it? Y'all let me know. 2 of the best bosses in Elden Ring's DLC were Rellana and Romina. Both fights were a lot of fun, the spectacles and designs were really cool, and there were a lot of lore revelations for both characters. But even though both of these bosses were generally really cool, and tend to be fan favorites of the DLC, it was a bit of a shame that neither of them have any dialogue or cutscenes attached to their fight. At least that's what you would think if you just play the game normally, but if you look at the credits, we can see that both of these characters have voice actors attached to their name. So this inspired people to look in the files to figure out if there was any leftover dialogue or cutscenes for these characters, and turns out there was. Each character has 1 line of voice dialogue in the files that was ultimately cut from the game. But thanks to Chinese data miners, these voice lines have been restored, so we get to hear what these characters would have sounded like. So check these out.
Children of the tower, butterflies take wing. Rise, twin moons.
Now admittedly it's not much, and these voice lines likely would have been attached to each of their signature attacks, with Romina's butterfly attack and Rellana's twin moons. But I do think Romina's line is interesting how she mentions the children of the tower. Is she calling the butterflies the children, or is that in reference to something else? It's interesting. Perhaps this was cut to avoid the boss spamming the dialogue lines along with their attacks, which I think maybe could have gotten annoying over a long period of time, but at the very least I'm glad we get to hear what these otherwise silent characters would have sounded like. But speaking of silent characters, the one who is notorious for not talking at all in the DLC is Dryleaf Dayne, the silent monk and one of the first followers of Miquella. In fact, Leda even tells us,
Dayne's reluctance to speak to you is no fault of your own. We've been acquainted for quite some time, but even I am yet to hear his voice. Perhaps one day.
But did you know, there is actually a way to get Dayne to talk? Towards the end of the DLC, you will end up fighting Leda and the other Miquella loyalists. Now, depending on how you progress the NPC quests throughout the DLC, this fight can go a lot of ways, but no matter how chaotic it gets, it's very hard to hear what's actually going on with the characters. But if you kill all the others first and leave Dayne for the last one, you'll be able to discern his dialogue much easier. And here's what he has to say. So unfortunately, even when he does speak, he doesn't have a whole lot to say. But again, like the others we talked about, it's at least cool to get to hear his voice at all. Now I'm going back and editing this video, and I think a lot of you guys probably already knew that one, so here's a bonus. Did you know that Midra's head was actually an item you were going to get in the DLC? An icon for it exists in the files, but at the moment, we're not entirely sure what it would have been used for. Now personally, I think it's one of those items that uses FP to perform an attack, but that's just a guess on my part based on how the icon looks. So pretty cool stuff. Do you wish we still had Midra's head as an item? Or do you think there's a good reason that it was cut? But back to the video. In the very center of the Land of Shadow, we can find the Moorth ruins, one of the most interesting bits of visual storytelling in all of the DLC. While at first it may not appear that much different than the other ruins throughout the DLC, when you get to the center and notice the massive crater, you might start scratching your head a little bit asking what exactly happened here. Especially when we look at the other ruins in the Realm of Shadow, all of these were destroyed and burned by Messmer's army, left to ash by Messmer's flame. But these other ruins don't have near the damage that Moorth ruins does, and definitely weren't caved into the ground. But when you drop into the crater in Moorth ruins, you will find a talisman called the Shatterstone Talisman, and it has a description that reads, "Linchpin stones are spiritual anchors, said to hold the ground in place and quell the fury of earthquakes. When this one shattered, the surrounding town fell into the broken earth. One account claimed that the moon itself had come tumbling down." Based on that account, I think we can make a pretty good guess as to what exactly happened to Moorth ruins. Well, we happen to have one character who not only uses moons to cause earthquakes, but also became a stalwart general in Messmer's army, as we learn from the description of her armor, which states that she gave up her birthright to follow Messmer. So perhaps the destruction of the Moorth ruins was a way of her showing her devotion, as well as her power, and it may also explain the namesake of the ruins, being a play on a mix between moon and earth. It's a very fascinating bit of lore right there. Now here's something that I never knew about in 3 playthroughs of the DLC. Did you know that you can summon Jolan for the Messmer fight, and her summon sign will appear inside the arena just like Hornsense, except on the opposite side. Now in order to actually get her as a summon, you will have to have done a bit of Ymir's quest before going to fight Messmer. So instead of progressing through Shadow Altus normally and going to the Shadow Keep, you will need to go through Moorth ruins and past Bonnie Village up until you get to Menace Metter. Then after you ring the first finger bell and return to Ymir, Jolan will have this to say to you.
How did Count Ymir reward you with that? Then I see you have gained his trust, and therefore mine. I am Jolan. The night is yours now to wield.
I always wondered what she meant by that, but now we know that when she says the night is now yours to wield, that means that she'll aid you in the fight against Messmer. Now from the bit I played with her summon, she puts up a pretty good fight against him, and apparently she can also be summoned against the tree sentinels that can be found in the hinterland, which I had absolutely no idea about either, but honestly, who summons for the tree sentinel fight? Regardless though, I think it's cool that these interactions with Jolan exist, because she is a really cool character, but unfortunately I think the majority of people, including myself, will go their entire time in the DLC not knowing about this. But now let's talk about some history, and look at some real-world inspiration for some of the characters we can find in the DLC. And today I want to talk about the Divine Birds, these enigmatic new enemies that are few and far between, and we find them in the ancient ruins of Rao. Now one thing that's been noticed about Elden Ring DLC specifically is that it draws lots of its inspiration from ancient Sumerian and Mesopotamian mythology, and we can see right off the bat the design of the Divine Birds certainly finds its inspiration there as well, clearly drawing from the divine birds of ancient Sumeria, with their humanoid bodies and bird heads. But furthering this connection to the ancient mythologies, the very idea of horns as a form of divinity dates back there as well. When we look at the main god of their mythology, Enki, he's characterized by having a crown of horns. And even the name of Enir Elim is Sumerian in nature, meaning the temple of God or the Lord of our God. There's a very deep rabbit hole to go down here with the Sumerian influence, such as the very nature of the tower, being inspired by the ziggurat depictions of the Tower of Babel, and it's very fascinating. We'll likely cover more of this in future videos, but for now I just wanted to give a little taste of it, to see if a lot of you guys caught on. The Lamenter might be the weirdest new addition in Elden Ring's DLC. This creature appears to be an amalgamation of the horn scent and something else entirely. The Lamenter's mask item description tells us, this transformation tallies with the state of a denizen of paradise, but the people of the tower denied and hid it from the world. In their foolishness, they viewed true bliss with deep fear. But to make this even weirder, have you ever taken a close look at the Lamenter form? Firstly, it emerges in black flame, which has me scratching my head to begin with, but take a look at its back. Here you can see that the back is actually a big face, with the nose right there in the middle, 2 outlines of eyes around the horns, and then a mouth below. Now keep that in mind, and then notice that the Lamenter has red hair, and some bells should start ringing. Even the hair that it uses as a loincloth is red as well. Now the weird part of this is that these are qualities of the fire giants. They're the only ones with a giant face on their body, with notorious red hair. Now to be honest with you, I don't even know where to begin on the lore connections between the Lamenters and the fire giants, but clearly there's something going on here. So I'll leave that up to you guys in the comments to figure out, and we can discuss the possibilities there. It just makes this already weird character that much weirder. But those are 8 new discoveries in Elden Ring's DLC, and again, if I showed you something that you didn't already know, which I guarantee at least one of these was something new to you, then be sure to hit that subscribe button. And if not, then you might be a liar. But either way though, I hope you enjoyed the video, and if you did, be sure to leave a like on it, and with all that, I will catch you in the next one.